This week on the podcast, how do you know that that feeling you get in the pit of your stomach is an absent finance function? Welcome to the Profit Cash Growth Podcast. This is the podcast for 6 and 7 figure business owners who are looking to grow a financially successful business. My co-host, Claire Hancott, is a finance director, chartered accountant and entrepreneur. And every week, I'll be exploring guidance and frameworks designed to help you increase your profits, improve your cash flow and grow your business. So I need to get this one knocked out, Claire, because where are we going this afternoon? After the place we're going first?
Oh, we're going to the gym and then we're going to Back to the Future at the cinema.
We're going Back to the Future?
No, we're going to see Back to the Future 2 at the cinema.
Which is wild, because the film's like 40 years. I'm dead excited because it came out like, I'm guessing about 1985, so I would have been 2. I've never had the chance to see it on the cinema. Obviously, what is it? My favourite film, isn't it?
Wow, yeah. I mean, we are literally poles apart here because I couldn't think of anything worse. So we had this conversation, didn't we? You said, can we please go and sit at the cinema? And I said to you, how are you going to make it better for me? So I'm really looking forward.
I said, put a blindfold on you and some earplugs in, didn't I? You said, I'm not accepting that because I'll feel vulnerable in cinema.
I'm really looking forward to see how you elevate this experience for me so that I do find it enjoyable and not 2 hours of utter
I just
crap.
bring you loads and loads of chocolate and sweets.
Yeah,
like a pig and
that
shit.
doesn't do it for me though.
Yes, it does. Oh, well. What we got? News story of the week. Come on, let's do it. So, in this week's news story of the week, you brought this one to us, Claire. You were like, shock horror. What's that on the news? Quick. Capture it as the news story of the week. And the news story of the week was that South Yorkshire police lose £65 million in accounting error. Tell us more, Claire.
Wow, this is... I mean, you do hear about this every now and again. There was an accounting error for ISG, the big construction company that went bust. That was partly due to an accounting error as well. And, you know, this does happen.
Enron?
I will actually say that at my time when I was a finance director, I signed off a £3 million dividend to the wrong company. So it can happen and it does happen. But the question is do businesses have checks and measures in place to identify it quickly enough and correct it? Yeah. And certainly when I made the error of signing off a £3 million dividend to the wrong business, it was literally picked up the next week. We realised what happened and we corrected it before any damage was done.
But you're not a government department, are you?
No, I'm not a government department. But basically what happened here is £65 million was loaned 5 years ago by, basically it was an intercompany loan from another area of the police. So they didn't have to go and get external finance. So they loaned £65 million to South Yorkshire Police and South Yorkshire Police went and spent it. Now, interestingly, there's obviously, this is part of a much bigger issue. But firstly, nobody recorded the loan anywhere. So that was an issue, that liability was never recorded. They haven't been making repayments for the past 5 years either. And therefore, it can also lead you to conclude that probably the assets that they went to purchase with it was a lot of equipment and vehicles and things like that probably these assets weren't recorded either. Yeah. So basically, the situation that they're in at the moment is they've missed 5 years worth of repayments. And they now have 50 million worth of cash flow that they have got to put into their budget, which has, you know, got to come off other things that they'd already planned. Yeah. So it's shocking. Do you know what's also quite scary is they have an audit and the auditors have not picked up on this for 5 years either.
Wow. And I bet the audit is one of the big four or something like that, isn't it? The Ernst & Youngs and all the rest of it. Scary. I
mean, I would say intercompany is probably one of the areas. So intercompany is when you loan things between other entities. And this is really common in small businesses. When people own more than one business, is they tend to have one older, more established business that perhaps cash flows more positively, and they tend to have a lot of money flowing in and out of that, so they tend to pay a lot of things out of that one business and loan money to the other businesses and things like that. And intercompany, I can almost guarantee that if you've got intercompany and I looked at your accounts, I would find mistakes all the time.
Well, you do, don't you? I mean, we're not talking about £65 million, but this is fundamentally, this is a great news story for the deep dive of what we're doing this week in the podcast, isn't it? And it comes on the back of exactly that. And it usually comes from when every time you're onboarding a new client, just those initial big wins are, oh, there's a 30 grand tax rebate here, a 60 grand, VAT rebate here. And, and it all through what we're going to call the lack of a finance function.
What I think is staggering in this, though, is that essentially South Yorkshire Police didn't declare this correctly in their accounts. They've just completely missed everything related to it.
I mean, this isn't the lack of a finance function. This is just ineptness, isn't it?
Well, I think they
have a bloody auditor as well.
There's several things that have happened here. So firstly, as a finance director, I would like to think that 65 million, I probably would have been involved in that conversation. So therefore, as the finance director, you should be looking at the accounts every month and realise that you're missing a liability for 65 million. It's quite a material number. So there's there's got to be this lack of involvement or communication of, high level decisions that are probably made at board level. How do they filter down into the business, and how do you make sure, and this applies to small businesses, when you're making a decision on a day-to-day basis, how do you make sure that flows through correctly to the people that have got to record the transactions in your system? And I think that communication flow is one of the biggest things that's missing, no matter what size business it is. But also, there's another business involved in this. There's another department that loaned this 65 million that didn't record it either. So they've essentially spent 65 million. Where have they spent it? What's happened in their accounts? Because their accounts can't be right either.
Well, let's hold that thought there and let's move on to this week's deep dive, because we're really going to unpack again, why these things really matter. So this week's deep dive, we are talking about the feeling of an absent finance function. And I think this came about, there's a number of points where this came about. I mean, this is fundamentally the point where a client picks up the phone to you, isn't it, Claire? And this is the feeling that they have at that initial discovery call and the reason that they're having that conversation with you. And I just wanted to play a short clip from Alex Hormozi's podcast recently, where he articulated this really well in terms of the feeling that the business owner has.
One of our portfolio companies came to me, super stressed out, and he was like pulling his hair, and I was like, what's going on, dude? And he said, dude, there's so much money coming in. And I was like, well, that's a wonderful thing. And he's like, yeah, but there's so much going out. And I was like, oh, well, that's not as wonderful of a thing. Okay. But what's the issue? He said, I just don't know where everything's going. And this was a business that we were scaling rapidly, and it was a business that had a reinvestment. Basically, we had to get returns on capital. So some businesses have low CapEx. So if you have an accounting firm, you just hire more accountants and you can continue to expand. If you have a manufacturing business, after you get to 1,000 widgets a day, you need to buy another machine, right? You have to reinvest capital to expand the business. And so this was a capital heavy business. He basically said, I don't know the rate at which I can expand based on the cash flow we have, and I'd still like to do distributions. And I obviously am a big fan of distributions as well. I said, freeze this moment, because he was really stressed out. I was like, this moment, this feeling you have, I was like, is a lack of a finance function, or an underdeveloped finance function. And he just kind of looked at me. I was like, right now you have a bookkeeper, and we've scaled far beyond that. Like, we need an in-house controller, not just somebody who's going to manage, credits and debits. That person could then give us kind of operationalize the financial information to give us cash flow projections so that we can see how many locations or how many reinvestments we can do, and still maintain cash flow as we meet these projections. We got that installed, and then a quarter later, he was like, dude, oh my God, all my stress is gone, because I know exactly how many we can, open or reinvest every single month and still get distributions. And I was like, right, wasn't that great? And so the constraint of the business at that time was a lack of data, specifically finance data.
So as you can see, the signs and the feelings that the business owner has are, all to do with the business is doing really well, but we just don't know how to manage everything that's going around. We don't know how to make decisions, and we're absent in a number of functions. Now, you're going to break down for us, aren't you, Claire, what those key functions are, or those key accountants in the business are, in a bit more detail to help sort of straighten that out. And it's not as straightforward as a quick 20-minute podcast, but you're going to do a bit of an overview as to what you should be looking for. And therefore, you can tick this through your box and say, do I have that? Don't I have that? And therefore, what's absent at the moment in my finance function?
Yeah. So I think I'll start by saying that actually what you tend to find when businesses hit sort of 7 figures and beyond and they're quite successful is they think that everything's running okay because they seem to have lots of cash. But I had a chat with a new client that I've started working with, and they said to me, we've got so many opportunities, we don't have time or energy to do all of them, but we don't know which one is the best one to do. And so that's often a symptom as much as you haven't got enough cash coming in or you're not making as much money as you want. So it's not always a negative reason why people get to this stage and they think, I need more from my accountant. But generally, if you think about where you are when you start out in business, all you're focusing on is getting sales. That's really kind of what you need to do. So you get to about multi 6 figures, your focus every day should just be about getting sales. So as long as you're getting some profit at the end of the year, you just need to focus on growing the sales number. So therefore, the financial management of your business, as much as it pains me to say this, the financial management of a tiny micro entity is not that important. It's about sales
at that point.
Yeah. So you have this situation where you grow, and when you're very new, you probably have a bookkeeper and or a year-end accountant, and they're just kind of posting your transactions, doing your tax returns and things like that. But then what happens when you start to get a bit bigger is you start to need information more frequently, and you start to need support making decisions, and some of the transactions that you're doing become more complex, particularly sometimes from a tax perspective as well. So I think that there's 4 functions in a finance department that a business that's turning over 7 figures and beyond should have. And this is actually how big companies structure their finance departments as well. So that gives you an idea of sort of what you're heading towards. So the first thing that businesses normally say to me when I start talking to them is they're like, oh, my accountant, I need a new accountant because my accountant never tells me how to save any tax. And I always cringe when they say this because the pleaser in me wants to say, oh, no, don't worry, I can have a look at your accounts. And, I'm sure there's something we can find. But it's like, yeah, that's because you probably don't have any areas you can save any tax.
This is because we're forever piped that 0.1% of the super uber wealthy who can structure super ridiculous tax schemes that are not really available to either the mid wealthy or the wealthy. And the reality is there's tax to pay. Yes, there's lots of schemes out there, and a good finance functional director will make sure you're claiming the right benefit schemes and various other things and maximising that. But there's no secret magic wand to suddenly saving a load of tax, is there?
No. The reality is that pretty much every accountant or bookkeeper should be aware of the basics that apply to pretty much every business. Make sure you're right on your VAT, your corporation tax, and like your payroll taxes. And most accountants and bookkeepers will be trained in those areas. But the stuff where you save money, like significant sums of money, are like these one-time events. They're like buying and selling a business, retiring, getting married, inheriting something. All of these sort of really unusual transactions that don't happen that regularly. Yeah,
the one-offs, they go through the P&L and then they disappear. But
so the risk is people think that they want an uber tax-savvy accountant, but you're going to be using them once every 3 to 5 years.
It's a one-off fee to say, look over this, what can we do? They help you with, a one-off piece of work, and that's it. It's more project work, isn't it? But you dare say, and I'm sure you're going to move on to it, there is massive opportunities to save tax just through good process. And this is just like making sure you're claiming all of the basics on a regular, systematic basis, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, most businesses are, because...
Are they? You, over the last few weeks, have... I found businesses, businesses that are not claiming their VAT, and
There's
fundamental, isn't it?
You might find an error on something a bookkeeper's doing. So somebody's putting a transaction onto your system and not claiming VAT because you haven't got a VAT invoice or something simple like that. But that's like really low level stuff. And a tax specialist is not going to go through your system and look at your transactions and make sure that you've claimed VAT correctly. So when people think that they need a tax specialist or somebody to save them loads of tax, actually, this is role number 1 in a finance department is a tax advisor, or an M&A accountant normally is where most businesses find that they go to a tax specialist. And really, I would say that unless you're doing these big one-off transactions, get a review with a tax specialist maybe every 3 to 5 years to make sure that, rules and regulations haven't changed, nothing significant's changed in your personal circumstances. Yeah. But really, you just need that tax accountant, you need a connection, you need somebody that you can go to when you need them, but you don't need them involved in your business in a day-to-day basis for 99% of businesses.
So finding a great go-to person in that accounting power team is really important, but you're only going to dip into them every now and then. It's going to be one lump of money to get them to do a piece of work for you.
Absolutely,
and then you're going to carry on.
And do not go and find an accountant, go and find a tax specialist. Because if you go and find an accountant and you talk to them about your limited company, they're going to give you advice about corporation tax. But what about your personal taxes?
Yeah.
What about the impact on inheritance tax? So that's why you really need to go and find a tax specialist. There are specific accountancy qualifications. You'll be looking for somebody that is a chartered tax associate, and they will be more advising you personally rather than looking at your business. They'll be advising you personally what the most tax efficient thing for you to do is based on your circumstances.
Yeah, the best way you always put this is you wouldn't go to see an optician for your bad back.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't, you don't go to your high street bank to get a specific business loan on asset finance.
Yeah. And when you use the phrase accountant, the vast majority of accountants are like GPs, and you're going to a GP, but you've got this like super duper eye problem and you need the best optician. You don't want to go and ask your GP about it. It's that kind of thing. So go and get a chartered tax advisor. And, often chartered tax advisors sit in accountancy firms. So I'm not saying don't go to a generalist accountancy firm, but make sure that the person you're dealing with is a chartered tax advisor.
Oh, I think to be clear, like all of these functions you're talking about can be entirely outsourced. It's entirely what your business does, isn't it, Claire? But, if you choose to have this in-house, this is the structure that you're looking to grow into. Or if you're not big enough for that, you can outsource it.
Yeah.
But you need to make sure that they're covering all these roles.
Yes.
In a specialist environment.
Yeah.
Great.
So the second role that everybody needs in their business, and this is normally the first role that people get, is their year-end accountant. That's the person that's going to do their year-end accounts and tax returns. And what we've seen is we started off with this tax advisor who I'm saying go to every 3 to 5 years for a little review. And now I'm saying your year-end accountant, you're going to use them once a year at year-end.
And this is kind of where most people start and almost finish, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're like, I've got an accountant. And they just send a load of stuff, and once a year they dip into it, they put some stat accounts together, and away it goes. That isn't a finance function that helps you run your business, is it?
No, because those statutory accounts the accountant is preparing, they're doing it for the purpose of submitting your tax return and preparing your accounts in the legal format that's required to put them on Companies House.
Which is downright useless to
anybody. Exactly.
In fact, it's supposed to, not be much use. You can't interpret the business. External partners can't interpret the business. And that's the point, isn't it?
Yes. Now, year-end accountants study very specific type of accountancy, and it is aimed at performing the task that they're doing. So I know this because I've actually been looking at accountancy firms to buy, and accountancy firms that generally do year-end accounts and tax returns do not do the advisory stuff very well. And this is where businesses end up disillusioned, and they think, I've been asking my year-end accountant for this information and that information, and they're not giving it to me. And it's like, if you actually ask the accountant, do you want to be my management accountant and my finance director and provide me with strategic commercial advice about how to grow my business? Basis. They would say, no, I didn't study that. They don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Some might say they want to do it, but they don't do it very well because they have got a ton of knowledge around producing year-end accounts and tax returns.
That's what they do.
That's what they've studied.
And it's always difficult when somebody turns around and says, I want to pay some money to do this other thing. We see this in like marketing a lot, where people are like, they start off as like a pay-per-click specialist, but before you know it, they're doing Facebook ads, and then they're doing Instagram ads, and they just become generalist at everything, but not very good.
Yes. And ultimately, 99% of accountancy firms are built on bread and butter of doing year-end accounts and tax returns. So that's what the team are practiced at. That's what all the systems and processes set up for, and that's what they're good at. And they're incredibly knowledgeable. I'm not dissing them. What I'm saying is that they are skilled in a very specific area of accountancy.
It's also it's born out of demand, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's like 80% of businesses don't even pass the VAT threshold, don't employ people. It's because what you're talking about and what we're talking about here services 1%, doesn't it?
Yeah. So you've got your highly skilled, highly specialist tax advisor that you're going to be using very infrequently, probably every 3 to 5 years, or on these unusual transactions. Then you've got your year-end accountant, which is like a generalist accountant that you're going to be using, again, fairly infrequently, because once a year isn't that often.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you've got your third role is going to be your bookkeeper. Now, I use the word bookkeeper loosely because there are varying degrees of a bookkeeper experience, essentially. There are bookkeepers that literally post invoices onto Xero, and that's the extent of their knowledge. And there are bookkeepers that have managed finance departments and are very knowledgeable in some taxes and can do year-end accounts and things like that as well. So
it's the spectrum of skills from, the first one you described is, for want of a better word, an admin assistant. Right through to skilled and qualified and understand more about what they're doing. Yeah.
And the degree of qualifications in the bookkeeping world also varies accordingly as well.
Yeah.
So your bookkeeper is going to be the person that literally should be ingrained in the day-to-day business operations. You'll be using them very frequently. And, in terms of the accountancy world, it's probably the lower skilled of the roles that we're talking about, but it is still a skilled accountancy role.
Yeah.
So that bookkeeper is going to be responsible for maintaining your books. And this is where I see a lot of bookkeepers. I think there's an issue with bookkeepers not understanding what businesses need because they don't have experience, because actually there's quite a push there are like some organisations out there that encourage particularly women, once they've had children and they want a more flexible job, to go and open a bookkeeping business. And it's becoming quite prolific that these are people that have never actually worked in an accountancy business, in an accountancy department. They've had very little practical training. They've studied a textbook and then they sell all their services as a bookkeeper.
I guess possibly because that started with where bookkeeping fits really nice in the fact that it's fairly non-time sensitive. You can do it flexibly. You can work around bringing kids up. You can do it any time of the day. You're not immediately there. It's not customer facing. So actually it fits that really nicely. But does the person fit the job? And that's the skills fit the job. And
the majority, if you go out to the marketplace, the majority of people offering bookkeeping services fall into that category. Self-studiers, self-employed people that have
one-man bands,
very, very little real-world practical experience working in businesses under more senior people that they can learn from. And I think that's the important thing. So getting the right level of bookkeeper is really important, because the scope of work that a bookkeeper can do ranges from the very basic, is what actually 99% of people think bookkeeping is, which is posting invoices and raising sales invoices, posting your receipts and expenses and doing your bank. And that's where most bookkeepers tend to start and stop. But they need to keep your books as well. So if you've listened to some of the podcasts and I talk about errors in the balance sheet, our news story was that a bookkeeper would have posted those transactions in a system and the bookkeeper's missed something or done something wrong, and then there's not these checks and measures.
Okay. So either they've just done the task and don't have the knowledge to think about what they're doing with that task and the outcome of that task, or they're not paid to do it and the next level up has not done the checks and balances that need to be done. Yeah.
So my recommendation is, if you're going to get that, if you're a bigger business, it's always this balancing act between, do I get somebody that can do the transactional side of things and can handle the more complicated stuff? The really complicated stuff tends to be, like if you've got loans and liabilities, if you've got assets, all of these more unusual transactions, but particularly if you're a growing business, can add a layer of complexity that your bookkeeper's likely not got the experience they think they have. They'll say, I know how to post that through the system, but do they actually know how to post it? And how, as a business owner, how are you testing their knowledge? How do you know that what they're doing is right?
Yeah.
So it's always a fine balance between getting somebody that is happy to deal with the transactional stuff, but has also got the capability to deal with the more complicated stuff, so that as a business owner, you have got absolute certainty that when you look at your accounts, they're correct.
Yep.
And if you're looking at your accounts and thinking that doesn't quite add up, it's probably because you haven't got a skilled enough bookkeeper for the size of your business.
Okay. Excellent.
So you've got 3 roles so far. We've got a tax expert, we've got a year-end accountant and a bookkeeper.
What's missing?
Then the final one is like a finance director, CFO, management accountant style role. And that person is going to be using the data that your bookkeeper's putting into the system, which is why it's incredibly important
that it's accurate, it's timely.
Accurate.
Yeah, this is where I see you tearing your hair out sometimes when you're trying to do what you do best, which is, garbage in, garbage out and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, that function has to be, in fact, all these functions have to be right in your business for your business to be working like a well-oiled machine, but especially for the finance director side of things, if you're going to make the right decisions for your business's growth, the this information has to be right, doesn't it?
And actually, I would say 75% of the clients that come to me and say, I'd like to work with you and, have a monthly meeting and discuss my finances and get management accounts, et cetera, that often is very easy for me to quote for, because I just say, yeah, this is the price of us producing that, and these are the numbers that we'll report to you, and these are the things that we'll discuss. But then I look at their finances and I'm like, but what your bookkeeper's doing is not adequate. Like, you've got this big gap in your bookkeepers doing this very low level transactional work, and then you're asking me to report on that. And I'm like, there's this whole other area of finance that nobody's dealt with.
Well, that's where the service that your team offer, called the bookkeeping assurance service, was born out of, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because, there is a piece of work which is that management level between the bookkeeper and the FD reporting and board meetings that, is not insignificant, but can be offered to businesses to effectively manage their bookkeeper and manage that input and manage the processes to make sure that that's running right. And that's one of the services that you guys offer as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's actually a conversation that I'm having with a business owner. Literally, I sent them some information yesterday to say, you're kind of at that crunch point where you have probably got a 2 or 3 day a week job for somebody in your business, doing the bookkeeping and managing everything that's going on, because they're growing quite rapidly. They've got multi-sites. There's a lot of stuff going on, and their current bookkeeper is not really handling the more complicated stuff.
Yeah.
So I sent them, I've sent them an example job spec and said, this is what that's going to cost you. But the flip side of that is it's delegation, not abdication. And therefore, as the business owner, are you comfortable that if you recruit somebody in-house, that you can manage that person and you can put checks and measures in place to have confidence that that person is doing what they're supposed to do?
That's the biggest problem, is that the business owners don't have the knowledge to do the management of that person or the skill set. This is where you guys come in often, isn't it? Because you've got the knowledge at the very top to be able to manage the assurance and be able to manage the bookkeeper and various things. You just know what you're looking for, don't you? That's relative. And it's all about qualification. I mean, this is why people study for 4 or 5 years and, and then go around multiple businesses to get a broad idea of, how these functions should be working.
And it is a very difficult one for a business because, generally outsourcing is going to be a bit more expensive, because if you want to outsource responsibility, that, it's not the actual doing of the task, it's the responsibility and the risk that you're outsourcing. Yeah. And so therefore that generally can work out a bit more expensive, actually. And it is a really difficult decision. And often I find that businesses, when they're in the low millions, will outsource. But then I've had clients where they've worked with me for a number of years, and then we start saying, okay, look, this is just, you just need somebody in-house now.
Parts of this needs to come in-house.
Yeah, you're now at this stage where you recruit somebody in-house. So your finance director, your management accounting team, I would suggest that they're involved in your business on a monthly basis, if not more frequently. We've got some clients that, we have a weekly cash flow review with them, and we're looking at payments in and payments out and making decisions and recommendations and stuff. So you've got everything from like your tax expert, who you're going to be meeting with every 3 to 5 years, right down to your bookkeeper, who's in your business every day.
Sure. I mean, in the biggest of businesses, your FD is your right-hand man to the MD. He's, she is, is at the end of the phone constantly, and, on the end of a WhatsApp group to say, just been to, can you put your eyes over this? What do you think about this? I'm about to make this decision. And, that's how they become completely fundamental in big business. There's a reason that it's always the CFO, the FD, that is the person that goes around talking to all the investors and is the second in command in all businesses.
Absolutely. I mean, like the clients that I've got, so I'm FD for 15 clients at the moment, and just this week in my inbox I've had from 3 different customers. I've had what we call deal assessments, so information memorandums they're looking at, so I'll have a quick look over company finances of companies that they're considering buying. I've had a loan agreement to see whether they can do that. I've had
financing
customer contract because it had some rebates and things like that, and then they just wanted to make sure that it was appropriate. So I'm getting all sorts of things in my
discount
inbox.
And promotion in
discount and promotion in.
Can you do cost benefit analysis of this?
That's really the type of stuff that you should be running past your FD, and they should be in your business and on hand when you need them to make sure that you're making a smart commercial decision. So some businesses, I say, really you might want to sit down with an FD and discuss your monthly accounts maybe on a bi-monthly or quarterly basis, because not much changes, particularly if you're a service business. But having somebody on hand that you can ping that stuff to and say, can you just give me an opinion on this, is really, really important.
And even if they're not on hand, I mean, we wrap all this up, don't we, with the most fundamental thing is the seat at the table that FD, whether outsourced or insourced, has to have at the board meeting every month.
Yeah.
And you must be holding board meetings every month. You must be.
I mean, one of the things, like when we onboard new client, we send like a welcome pack to them, and we always have in that welcome pack, can you please add us to your newsletter? And nobody does it, and then we have to go onto their website and subscribe ourselves. And I've never ever seen another accountant do that, but it's like the more we know about your business, the better we advise you.
Absolutely.
And I just think that business owners come look at me when I have 6 heads and I'm like, can you subscribe me to your newsletter, please? And they're like, why do you want that? Like, you're just doing my accounts. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm a part of your business.
Yeah.
Like, I need to know everything that's happening to be able to advise you in the best way. I'm not just saying, oh, this is what you need to do from a tax perspective, or this is what you need to do from a profit perspective. It's like, what is the best thing long term for your business?
And they always say success leaves clues, doesn't it? And if you look at the biggest companies, there is a reason why the FD is sat alongside the MD in every single board meeting, in every single investor meeting. And there is a reason why those companies are structured in that way, because it is absolutely the second most important function after the MD, because it's the decision-making function, the strategic decision-making function.
Yeah. And
amazing.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think businesses think that their bookkeeper can sort of step up to the mark and help them a bit with management accounts and stuff. And often they just don't get what they need. And
hopefully this answers that big question that we get from a lot of business owners who ask that simple question, which is, what's an FD and what do they do? What do they do? And I think business owners are, if they haven't come from big business, are that ignorant to it. And it's well worth being clear about just how much this can open a door for your business completely and utterly, from a risk mitigation perspective, but from a growth perspective, about confidence of decisions, and give you confidence in making decisions as well.
I also think debunking this myth that I literally hear come out, I think, of nearly 100% of business owners' mouths, is that they want an accountant that's going to save them tax. And I think once that goes out the window and I say, actually, you would be much better off.
I mean, we never talk about tax in big business. It's just a statutory thing that's dealt with by, often it's even outsourced, isn't it? To our stat accountants at the end, and it's not even an internal function a lot of the time in big business, is it?
Well, so when I was an FD, so we were part of a group of companies, and we had a tax team at group level that dealt with international tax. But it becomes much more complicated when you're an international company. But I mean, I would be going to like quarterly updates. So the big accountancy firms that are trying to sell you services, they do quarterly tax updates and things like that. So as an accountancy professional, I would make sure that I was up to date with what was happening. And then if I thought that we needed external advice, I would go to the external accountants and get it.
Yeah. On the specialism, it's going back to the doctor analogy and various other things.
But we didn't have, even £250 million company, we did not have a tax specialist in the business.
No. Well, thanks very much. I think that really, really rounds off the answer is, what is that feeling of an absent finance function? I think you've really just filled in all those gaps that we heard Alex Hormozi talk about at the very beginning. And let's move on to this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra. So it is my background, but I love a newspaper because I was born and bred newspapers. And I don't think that's entirely influenced this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra. But my Profit Cash Growth Extra is a subscription to, I'm going to say, I mean, for me, it's the Sunday Times. I don't have time to read a newspaper every day, but the Sunday Times offers a incredible deep dive news review of everything that week. Newspapers today are not about breaking news, are they? They're about, I see them more like The Economist or a magazine or something like that. And Sunday Times is like that. Really,
it's much more about the writing than the breaking news element now. Whereas you used to get a newspaper every day because it's the only way you got news.
Absolutely. I mean, go back to where I started in local newspaper. I was breaking murders and driving straight out there to make sure people knew about it, because that's the only way they could know about it. But for me, a subscription to the Sunday Times, it's pretty cheap when you subscribe to it on an ongoing basis compared to the cover price. I love it. It gives me all the news and the reviews that I need for the week. And in a world of not knowing what's credible and what's not, I just think there's a few sources. The Financial Times, the Telegraph, the Times are probably the three, news sources that, have some credibility to them and still some standards about what's been put out there versus taking your news off social media, which you should absolutely never do.
And I'm a bit different. I like to snack on news
Yes.
several times a day. Actually, I'm a bit of a news addict
Junkie.
on the apps, but I do still really enjoy reading more businessy. So I read the business section at the weekend and things like that. So
Great.
yeah, the Sunday Times subscription, it controls our Sunday. We get up every day. We go to Waitrose at 10 o'clock and we get a newspaper and we sit
It's
and
a
read
few hours of
papers.
my afternoon gone, isn't it?
Afternoon.
Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly.
it just fills you in on everything, but it just is another way of just broadening your mind and learning new things.
What I love about a newspaper that current media doesn't give you is a newspaper allows you, it's not curated for you. It allows you to stumble outside your comfort zone, stumble outside your echo chamber and read more broadly about what's going on in the world. And I think you don't get that in digital media because it's completely curated and they're just feeding you what they know you already read. And I think that's a problem.
That is true.
Yeah.
However, you have got to be careful that, you're going for the Sunday Times, which is a well-known sort of Tory, conservative, right-wing sort of supporting
I don't think so.
paper.
Not necessarily.
Well,
it's
if you
owned
went
by
for
News International with the Sun. They're a big Labour. And newspapers swing newspapers have swung over their lifetime depending on which way they want to go. So
generally, I would say it's if you were going to read the Times, I would then also read maybe the Guardian to counteract it, because
I would never
then
read
you would
the Guardian. That's disgraceful.
exactly because
it's read by
just
teachers
proves
and
my
students,
point.
and it's
So you
completely
feel
and
like-
utterly not the right medium for the life that I live. So I'm not going to be reading
but
that,
my
I'm afraid.
point is it's fairly curated because you're likely, as a right-wing person, you're likely to be reading views
all
that are
I
similar
want to know
yours.
is that it's factually correct. That's all I want to know, is whatever it
Yeah,
is factually
okay.
correct, which, you can be sure that those news sources are. So thanks for joining us for another week's podcast. As always, as we say, if you feel like you might have outgrown your accountant and maybe after today's episode, you fully understand what that feeling might be, do get in touch with Claire and the team at Profit Cash Growth. Go to profitcashgrowth.com. On there, you can book a free discovery call where you can explore the aspects that we've discussed today. And don't forget, please, just click the share button. I think this one's a key episode for any business that feels a little bit lost in where they're going strategically. So do share this episode with any business owners that you know. Just click the share button, pop it in a text message and say, "Hi mate, I reckon you'd like this." And I don't know why I put on a little chimney sweep voice there, but and don't forget, rate, review and subscribe us wherever you find us. And of course, if you like us.